Chapter 2. Not all slept. Not everyone slept that night. Not Army General Kirill A. Meretskov, Deputy Commissar of Defense, who boarded the Red Arrow Express in Moscow at midnight June 21st, on an urgent mission to Leningrad. Hour after hour he stood looking out the window of his polished mahogany compartment with its heavy brass fittings, its Brussels carpet, its French plumbing. He was riding an old international car of the French Wagon Litz Company, a heritage of the imperial past. North of Moscow, the searchlight of the Red Arrow's locomotive cut through the dusk, and then, as the train hurtled down the straight course laid out by the engineers of Tsar Nicholas I, the horizon slowly lightened. Meretskov knew this country well. During the years 1939-40, he had headed the Leningrad military district. It was he who commanded the Soviet troops in the Winter War on Finland. He had known Leningrad since the days of the Revolution. Almost every mile of broken birch and fir forest between Moscow and Leningrad was familiar to him. As the landscape spread out in the cool light, he stared from the window, watching the sun rise in a pale blue sky. The train plunged through the deep green of the forest, and then cut out across watery marshes. Suddenly he heard the wheels echo hollowly on a bridge, and before him appeared the quiet waters of the Volkhov River. Then again swamps, more fir forests, more swamps. General Meretskov felt a sense of mounting excitement as he saw the Leningrad land again. Excitement and a sense of concern, a sense of pride and a sense of history. Pushkin's line ran through his mind. "Show your colors, city of Peter, and stand steadfast like Russia." He watched silently at the window, his face tense and thoughtful, as the train sped on towards Peter's capital. There was much to be done as soon as he arrived. In the barn-like Leningrad offices of the Baltic merchant fleet beside the Neva passenger freight port, a conviction grew on Saturday, June 21st, that something strange was afoot. Exactly what, no one was certain. Most disturbing was the silence in Moscow, the silence of the People's Commissariat. It had begun on Friday, when Nikolai Pavlenko, deputy chief of the political department, came to his office Friday morning. He had found a cryptic radiogram on his desk, signed Yuri. The message, sent in the clear, had been received just before dawn. It said, "Being held. Can't leave port. Don't send other ships. Yuri, Yuri. German ports holding Soviet ships. Protest. Yuri, Yuri." The message almost certainly had been transmitted from a Soviet freighter, the Magnitogorsk, which was unloading cargo in the German port of Danzig. The radio operator of the Magnitogorsk was Yuri Stasov, and the message sender recognized his characteristic sending style. What did it mean? What should be done? The Magnitogorsk did not respond to wireless messages. There were 5 other Soviet ships in German ports. No word from them either. The Yuri message was relayed to Moscow. No reaction. Pavlenko didn't leave the matter there. He telephoned Alexei A. Kuznetsov, secretary of the Leningrad Regional Party Committee, and asked for guidance. Kuznetsov suggested that precautions be taken, but warned that the question evidently is being dealt with in Moscow. For the moment, nothing could be done about the ships already in German waters. But the fleet authorities decided not to send any more to the west until they knew what was going on. The motor ship Vittoria Piataletka and the steamer Lunacharsky, bound for German ports, were told to stand by in the Gulf of Finland and be prepared to put into Riga or Tallinn. All day Saturday the merchant fleet waited for instructions from Moscow. None came. Pavlenko consulted Secretary Kuznetsov again. He agreed that the Vittoria Piataletka be diverted to Riga and the Lunacharsky returned to Leningrad. It was an unusual demonstration of initiative for Soviet bureaucrats to act without orders from Moscow. Meanwhile, ships in Baltic waters were told to keep in constant communication with Leningrad. Toward evening, the chiefs of the merchant fleet met. Sunday was a free day, but they decided the top personnel should come to work. The others would stay in town, ready for a quick call in an emergency. The chief administrative and political officers and their deputies, including Pavlenko, remained at their desks most of the evening, then went home. The Leningrad Military Command embraced a vast area. In event of war, it would become the command center for the region extending from the Baltic Sea to the Arctic reaches of the Kola Peninsula. Subordinate to it, so far as land operations were concerned, was Admiral Arseny G. Glovko, commanding the Northern Fleet at Polarny at the Murmansk shore. Admiral Glovko had been reporting more and more alarming intelligence. For the past week, flights of German reconnaissance planes had been observed over Soviet installations. What should he do? The response was, "Avoid provocation. Don't fire at great altitudes." Golovko grew increasingly restive. On the previous Wednesday, June 18th, Lieutenant General Markian M. Popov, commander of the Leningrad Military District and Golovko's immediate supervisor under the interlocking Soviet command system, had arrived in Murmansk. Golovko hoped for enlightenment, but none was forthcoming. Popov confined himself to questions of construction of fortifications, new airdromes, supply depots, and barracks. If he had any intelligence on the current situation, he did not divulge it. "Apparently he knows no more than we," Golovko noted in his diary on June 18th. "Sad. Such vagueness is not a very pleasant perspective in case of sudden attack." In the evening, Popov left for Leningrad. I accompanied him to Kola. He treated us to a farewell beer in his special car, and that ended our meeting. From Moscow, nothing definite either. The situation remains unclear. It got no clearer on Thursday, June 19th. There were more German overflights. Nothing on Friday. On Saturday, Moscow's Stanislavski Musical Theater, starting its summer tour of provinces, was presenting Offenbach's La Paracole in Murmansk. Golovko decided to attend. He took his military council member, A.A. Nikolaev, and his chief of staff, Vice Admiral S.G. Kucherov, with him. The theater was filled. There were standees. Golovko relaxed and let the music push his worries out of his mind. So, he thought, judging by their expressions, did his aides. The audience seemed at ease, possibly because Golovko and his staff were present. "The situation can't be so bad, the chiefs are here." This is what he read in the faces of the spectators as they promenaded in the lobby between the acts. All the way back to headquarters, he, Nikolaev, and Kucherov talked about the operetta. Arriving at headquarters a little before midnight, he ordered tea and sat down for the late evening situation report. At the Leningrad Defense Command installations at Kingisepp on the Monzun archipelago of the Estonian Baltic coast, Major Mikhail Pavlovsky spent Saturday, June 21st, at Coastal Defense Headquarters. He had been receiving reports of unusual German activity for days, but nothing new came in on Saturday. As he was leaving the office, a friend in the 10th Border Regiment, Major Sergei Skorodomov, telephoned. "How about getting your better half and coming to the theater? The NKVD Song and Dance Ensemble is giving a concert. I've got tickets." Pavlovsky said he would have to check with his wife. "Any incidents today?" he asked. "Absolutely quiet," Skorodomov replied. The two couples went to the concert. Afterward, they walked home. The city was still. Most people had already retired for the night, although it was still full daylight on the Baltic. Pavlovsky and his wife were undressing and talking about an excursion to the country on Sunday when the telephone rang. It was headquarters calling Pavlovsky back to his post. "What is it?" Pavlovsky's wife asked. "I don't know, Klavidia," he replied. "I don't know anything at all. Maybe it's a training maneuver." He kissed his wife and, opening the door carefully so as not to disturb the sleeping children, walked out of the house. The hour was just before midnight. What was happening in the Leningrad area was duplicated in other frontier regions. June 21st found Army General Ivan I. Fedyuninsky in command of the 15th Rifle Corps, based on Kovel and defending the Bug River sector of the Central Front. His concern had mounted since Wednesday, the 18th, when a German soldier deserted to his lines and reported that the Nazis were preparing to attack Russia at 4 a.m., June 22nd. Footnote. An extensive literature has grown up around this incident, and there is controversy as to precisely when the deserter made his way to the Soviet lines. End of footnote. When Fedyuninsky reported this information to his chief, 5th Army General M.I. Potapov, he was curtly told, "Don't believe in provocations." But on Friday, returning from regional maneuvers, Fedyuninsky encountered General Konstantin Roskosovsky. Rokossovsky, commander of a mechanized corps attached to the Fifth Army, did not shrug off the signs of imminent Nazi attack. Indeed, he shared Fedyaninsky's concern. Footnote: Rokossovsky's concern was not deep enough to keep him from planning a fishing trip on the weekend of June 21st to 22nd. At the last minute, a concert was scheduled for Saturday night at his headquarters in Novgorod-Volhynsky, so that instead of being away, he was on hand to alert his commanders, but they were ordered to go to their units only after the concert. End of footnote. It was late Saturday night before Fedyaninsky retired, but he could not sleep. He got up and smoked a cigarette at an open window. He looked at his watch. The time was 1:30 a.m. Would the Germans attack tonight? All seemed quiet. The city slept. The stars sparkled in a deep azure sky. Can this be the last night of peace? Fedyaninsky asked himself. Will the morning bring something else? He was still pondering this question when the telephone rang. It was his chief, General Potapov. Where are you? Potapov demanded. In my quarters, Fedyaninsky replied. Potapov told him to go immediately to staff headquarters and stand by for a call over a special high-security line, the so-called VC telephone. Fedyaninsky did not wait for a car. He threw a coat over his shoulders and ran to staff headquarters. He found the VC line out of order. He got through on the ordinary phone, and Potapov ordered him to put his division on alert. But don't respond to provocations, Potapov insisted. As Fedyaninsky put down the receiver, he heard a fusillade of pistol shots. The car which had been sent to bring him to staff headquarters was being fired on by Nazi diversionists who had slipped across the frontier. Footnote: a number of similar attacks were reported, including another in Fedyaninsky's command. Gregory Baklanoff describes such an incident, probably based on Fedyaninsky in his novel, but makes it occur on the night of June 21st rather than in the early hours of June 22nd. End of footnote. Vice Admiral Vladimir Tribuz, commander-in-chief of the Baltic Fleet, charged with the defense of Leningrad's sea approaches, had watched events through the dismal spring of 1941 with unconcealed apprehension. More perhaps than any other single Soviet officer, Tribuz was apprised of the activity of German planes, German submarines, German transports, German agents, and German sympathizers. Somewhat against his inclinations, because of security problems and the difficulty of constructing a new fleet base, Tribuz had advanced Baltic Fleet headquarters from its historic seat at the Kronstadt fortress in Leningrad to the port of Tallinn, 200 miles to the west. The shift had taken place when the Soviets took over the Baltic states in the summer of 1940. It gave Admiral Tribuz an observation post within the newly acquired, only partially assimilated Baltic areas. He began to report the arrival of German troops at Memel, just across the new Soviet-Baltic border, as early as March 1941. In the same month, German overflights became a daily phenomenon at most Baltic bases. By June, Admiral Tribuz estimated at least 400 German tanks had been concentrated just a few miles from the Soviet-Baltic border. Even more suggestive was the conduct of German engineers engaged in work for the Soviet Navy. The Russians had purchased from Germany late in 1939 an unfinished cruiser, the Lutzow. The Russians towed it to Leningrad in the spring of 1940 for completion in the great Baltic shipyards. Several hundred German specialists were working on the Lutzow. In April, parts and supplies failed to arrive on schedule from Germany, although the Germans previously had been remarkably punctual. Tribuz mentioned the delay to Admiral N.G. Kuznetsov, the naval commissar, who talked to Stalin about it, but Stalin merely suggested keeping an eye on the situation. A little bit later, the German engineers began to return home on one pretext or another. By the end of May, only 20 remained in Leningrad, and by June 15th, the last had vanished. Simultaneously, German ships disappeared from Soviet waters. By June 16th, not one remained. Tribuz was so worried that on Thursday, June 19th, he convened his military council and decided to order a No. 2 combat alert for the Baltic Fleet. Chief of Staff Vice Admiral Yuri A. Panteleev started to scribble out the orders while Tribuz telephoned Admiral Kuznetsov in Moscow. "Comrade Commissar," Tributes told Admiral Kuznetsov, "we have arrived at the view that an attack by Germany is possible at any moment. We must begin laying down our mine barrages, or it will be too late. And I think it essential to raise the operational readiness of the fleet." Tributes listened to Kuznetsov a moment, then hung up. "He agrees to the alert," Tributes told Pantaleev, "but orders us to be careful and avoid provocation, and we will have to wait on the mine laying. Now let's get to work." Footnote: Kuznetsov's memoirs imply that the initiative for the No. 2 alert came from him. In any event, Kuznetsov did issue orders June 19th for a No. 2 alert, not only for the Baltic Fleet, but also for the Northern Fleet and the Black Sea Fleet. The order was issued by the Military Council of the Baltic Fleet, according to K.L. Orlov. End of footnote. On the evening of June 21st, Leningrad's sea frontiers, the Baltic Fleet, the shore bases, the coastal artillery as far west as Libau, Lipaja, the island sentries in the Baltic, and the new leased area fortress of Hangul, the submarines, the patrol craft, and other seaborne units, all were on a No. 2 alert. Just a step below all-out readiness for action, live ammunition had been distributed, leaves had been canceled, full crews stood at their posts. Tributes himself and his staff had left the old city and moved into their War Command post, an underground shelter outside Tallinn. Tributes got one more alarming report. This one came from a sentry ship, the submarine M96, on duty near the entrance of the Gulf of Finland. Captain A.I. Marinesco reported sighting a convoy of 32 transports, many under the German flag, near the Benkshire lighthouse around 4 a.m., June 21st. That evening, Tributes was in constant touch with Admiral Kuznetsov in Moscow. The naval commissar was an experienced military man. He had served in the Navy since boyhood, and in the mid-1930s he went to Spain to advise the Spanish Navy in the Civil War. He shared Tributes' alarm, but felt powerless to act in absence of instructions from the Supreme Command. He had put the fleets on the No. 2 alert on his own responsibility, technically calling it a training maneuver. In fact, it was a precaution against sudden war. Tributes and Kuznetsov conferred after the evening situation report by Deputy Naval Chief of Staff V.A. Alafazov. Chief of Staff Admiral S.I. Isakov had gone to Sevastopol for the Black Sea maneuvers. Tributes told Kuznetsov he considered the situation so grave he and his staff proposed to stay at their command post through the night. Kuznetsov repeated that his hands were tied as far as further action was concerned. The two officers concluded their talk in a mood of frustration. Kuznetsov's worry grew during the evening as he talked with the Black Sea Command at Sevastopol and the Northern Command at Polyarny, and he too decided to stay at his post all night. Again, he telephoned the fleet commanders, cautioning them to be on the alert. At the High Command until late in the evening of June 21st, Kuznetsov noted in his memoirs, all was quiet, no one called me, and no one expressed any interest in the preparedness of the fleet. Sometime between 10:30 and 11 p.m., Kuznetsov got a call from Marshal Simon K. Timoshenko, the defense commissar, who said, "I have some very important information. Come over here." Footnote: Kuznetsov has written several versions of this evening. He gives the time of this call as 10:30 in one version and 11 p.m. in another. Probably it was closer to 11 p.m. Kuznetsov spent only a few minutes with Timoshenko and was back in his own office and on the phone to Tributes by about 11:30 p.m. End of footnote. Together with his deputy, Alafuzov, who was considerably worried because his uniform was badly rumpled and there was no time to change, Kuznetsov hurried out of his office. The defense command was just down the Frunz Street from the naval headquarters, and the two men walked to Timoshenko's office, located in a small building across from entrance number 5 of the defense commissariat. After a muggy hot day, Kuznetsov recalls, there had been a short brisk shower, and now it was a bit fresher. Young couples were strolling 2 by 2 on the boulevard, and somewhere nearby a dance was in progress. The sound of a phonograph came from an open window. The two men bounded up the staircase to the second floor of the defense commissariat. The breeze rustled the heavy magenta curtains, but it was so stifling that Kuznetsov unbuttoned his jacket as he strode into Timoshenko's office. At the table sat General Georgy K. Zhukov, Chief of the General Staff. Marshal Timoshenko was dictating a telegram, and Zhukov was filling out a telegraph blank. He had a pad of blanks in front of him, and he had already used up more than half of them. Obviously, the two men had been at work for some hours. It is possible that the Germans will attack, and it is necessary that the fleet be in readiness, Timoshenko said. I was alarmed by the words, Kuznetsov recalls, but they were not in any way unexpected. I reported that the fleet was already in a state of highest military readiness and awaited further orders. I stayed for some minutes to get the situation precisely, but Alefazov ran back to his office in order to send urgent radiograms to the fleet. Only let them be on time, I thought, as I returned to my quarters. Kuznetsov immediately telephoned Tributz. Not more than 3 minutes passed, Kuznetsov writes, when I heard on the telephone the voice of Vladimir Filipovich Tributz. Don't wait until you receive the telegrams, which are on the way. Put the fleet on operative alert number 1, combat alert. I repeat, combat alert. Exactly when the Defense Commissariat had received the order, be ready to repel the enemy, I do not know, Kuznetsov reports, but I remained without information until 11 p.m., June 21st. At 11:35 p.m., I concluded my conversation by telephone with the commander of the Baltic Fleet. And at 11:37, as is recorded in the operational journal, the combat alert number 1 had been announced. That is, precisely within 2 minutes, all units of the fleet began to receive the order to repel possible attack. Footnote. Apparently Kuznetsov transmitted 2 telegrams. He gives the text of the first, a simple urgent order, as SF, KBF, CHF, PVF, DRF, Combat Alert Number 1, Urgent, Kuznetsov. The initials designate the Northern Baltic and Black Sea fleets, and the Pinsk and Danube River flotillas. The second message was fuller. It said, in the course of 22 and 23 June, sudden attack by Germans is possible. German attack may begin with provocational action. Our task not to give rise to any provocation which might increase complications. Simultaneously, fleets and flotillas must be in full combat readiness to meet sudden blows by Germans or their allies. I order, transfer to combat alert number 1, carefully camouflaged. Carrying out of reconnaissance in alien territory waters is categorically forbidden. No other actions are to be taken without special permission. According to Pantaleyev, whose task it was to transmit the combat alert to all units of the Baltic Fleet, the number 1 alert had been acknowledged by all commands by 1:40 a.m. Sunday, June 22nd. Kuznetsov says that the combat alert number 1 was announced within 20 minutes of his telephone conversation with Tributz at Hangul, the Baltic bases, and other installations. The individual reports indicate that Libau and Ventspils went on number 1 alert at 2:40 a.m. Admiral Golovko reported all his Northern Fleet units had been alerted by 4:25 a.m. The Black Sea Fleet reported Sevastopol on number 1 alert by 1:15 a.m., and all units by 2 a.m. The Danube Flotilla reported itself on number 1 alert at 2:22 a.m. One account, that of the official Soviet history of the war in the Baltic, suggests the number 1 alert was issued by Kuznetsov at the strenuous urging of Admiral Tributz, who is said to have telephoned Kuznetsov repeatedly on the night of June 21st, requesting such a measure. The same account asserts, possibly mistakenly, that the longer telegram from Kuznetsov was not received until 2:30 a.m., and that its text read, on Monday, June 23rd, a sudden attack by fascist Germany is possible, but it is also possible that it will only be a provocation. End of footnote. The night that was no night wore on. Later, Kuznetsov was to write, there are events that cannot be erased from memory. Today, a quarter of a century has passed, and I precisely remember the experiences of that tragic evening of June 21st, 22nd.